tenemos mucho trabajo a hacer, ¿no? El camino es duro. Y también una palabra que sale en su charla varias veces, la palabra absurdo, porque la vaina totalmente es absurdo. Entonces, permíteme empezar con una historia, un ejemplo de eso, ¿no? Pero para empezar, vamos al Amazonas colombiano, hasta la tierra de la gente de la anaconda, los Barazana, Macuna, Tanimucos. Ellos creen que lleguen a la selva del río de la leche, Amazonas, subiendo en los tiempos mitológicos. Viven en los malocas grandes. Let me take you there. It's night. A ver. Disculpe. Perdón. A ver. Mejor. And so we are in the longhouse, the maloca. It's nighttime. The women have gone to their area of the longhouse con los chicos, listo para dormir. Y los hombres come to their end of the maloca. They fire the yaruma leaves to make the ash. They then have toasted the hoja de la coca para secarlo. Then they place the ash and the leaves into the pilon, pound it, and then sift it in fiebre or tejido, and then they empezar a mambiar. Es muy suave, muy calma, y se siente algo muy sutil. Y la primera vez cuando yo fui allá, comiendo, mambeando así, salimos en la bosque, y con ese mambe, para la primera vez yo pude andar en el bosque, con todo ese calor, sin nada. Y mi profesor, Schultes, que estaba allá para 15 años, él estaba mambeando todos los días. Y before I went to the Amazon, he said to me, you must try the mambe of the Tanimucos. He was like a sommelier, because mambe is the champagne of Coca. Schultes once pulled out a can of mambe at a society party in Bogota, and he explained to anyone who would listen that the preferred ash came from the large palmate leaves of Cecropia sciatophylla, as opposed to the decidedly inferior leaves of Cecropia pelata. He naturally had the good stuff. Well, on October 31st, 2020, WPVI Action News, an NBC affiliate in Philadelphia, led its evening report with a sensational account of a rare drug bust at Philadelphia International Airport. U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents had seized 12 pounds of what they described as green cocaine, along with a mysterious brown tar-like substance which had tested positive for nicotine. The powder tested positive for cocaine. According to the authorities, the green hue was a way of camouflaging the drug, which through a chemical process using gasoline, ammonia, and other chemicals could be turned white. The implication being that ounce for ounce, it was just your ordinary blow tinged with another color. Now this is where it gets great. This seizure, reported Casey Durst, head of CBP's Baltimore field office, perfectly illustrates how Customs and Border Protection officers use keen insight and professional scientific analysis to intercept dangerous drugs being smuggled into our communities. In Cincinnati, Port Director Richard Gillespie heralded those singularly responsible for having kept this dangerous green powder out of our neighborhoods. Well, of course, as I don't have to, no tengo que explicar a ustedes, this righteous pose was, in fact, concealing a farce worthy of Molière. The source of nicotine, of course, reported in the bus was unveils, a substance commonly used, deep concentration of tobacco, and tobacco being an addictive drug that kills 400,000 Americans every year. But that wasn't a problem because tobacco is legal. The green powder, of course, was Mambay, and as early as 1957, Professor Schultes had reported its use as a mild stimulant and essential component of the nutritional regime of all the peoples of the Northwest Amazon. In fact, daily consumption of Mambay more than satisfied the daily requirements for any number of nutrients. And prepared from the Amazonian variety, Ipadu, which has half the concentration of alkaloid, Mambay is as much food as stimulant, as innocuous as a cup of dark tea or coffee, and far better for the health. Now, the news reports also went on to say that the green cocaine had been sent to labs in Savannah and Newark for analysis. Not reported were the actual results of the assays, trivial amounts of cocaine equivalent to the concentration of caffeine in a coffee bean. Had anyone tried to snort the powder, they would have simply plugged their nostrils most unpleasantly with a substance the consistency of talcum powder. Mambay, as many of you learned last night, is always consumed orally. Now, to suggest that smugglers might import Mambay to extract cocaine, even assuming it could be done given the amount of ash in the preparation, makes about as much sense as suggesting that somebody would import Dom Perignon champagne to extract ethyl alcohol. Of course, like Mambay is a specialized item made by highly trained individuals on a small scale. And drug cartels that have successfully smuggled cocaine hydrochloride into America by the ton for generations aren't about to waste their time with it. What in fact transpired in Philadelphia was a drug bust on par with Eliot Ness mistaking a truckload of potatoes for vodka and seizing the entire works as a violation of the Volstead Act. Now, it's one thing to contemplate that after 50 years of war on drugs, there are more people in more places using worse drugs in worse ways than ever before. It's quite another to acknowledge that having spent billions of dollars a year, $1 trillion altogether over 50 years, the frontline defenders of the United States still do not know the difference between a pure alkaloid extracted from a plant in 1860 and Coca, a benign and highly nutritious plant revered today by millions of indigenous people and long celebrated in the Americas as the divine leaf of immortality. Now, new drugs always have a way of upsetting societies. You know, the French Revolution was caused by caffeine, at least in part, because until the middle of the 17th century, you couldn't drink the water in any European city. So you had to drink spirits, wine, beer. The entire continent was besotted with alcohol. And then within 20 years, 3 central nervous system stimulants came in: coffee, tea, and chocolate. All had to be prepared with boiled water, which made them palatable and safe, and all of them were rare and dispensed in centers of intrigue, the coffee houses, the penny universities of London. And so instead of being in your tavern with your brow and your beer, you were wired on caffeine and you couldn't shut up. And you suddenly thought, Versailles is a bit bigger than my place. Have you noticed? The mob that stormed the Bastille left from Voltaire's favorite coffee house in Paris, the Café de Foy. Naturally, those in charge wanted to curtail this use. In Turkey, Constantinople, you were beheaded if you were caught drinking coffee. As late as 1777, Frederick the Great in Germany tried to get his people back onto beer because it created a more docile peasantry. But by then it was too late because the Industrial Revolution was beginning. And you could harvest a field after a few tumblers of beer, but not work a machine tool. So suddenly caffeine became like steam, the fuel of the Industrial Revolution. The coffee break became institutionalized as a regular temporal moment to take a new dose of the drug. And because of that, coffee became culturally domesticated and therefore dispensed organically. And because of that, we have incredible market in coffee. We don't have a black market in coffee, and we don't have people using pure caffeine, which is a good thing, because it's basically a fundamental axiom of pharmacology that the purer the drug, the greater the potential of abuse. Now, the first drug to be extracted in pure form from a plant, of course, was morphine. Cocaine was the second, and it remains an important medicinal drug for nose, throat, and ear surgery, a perfect illustration of the adage, there are no bad and good drugs, just good and bad ways of using drugs. And of course, Angelo Mariani came down on the good way when he created this extraordinary Bordeaux wine, cocaine, coca leaf extract, and red Bordeaux wine. He was quite a character. He was responsible for 2 US presidents, 4 kings, 2 popes, 3 princes, 1 Russian Tsar, 1 Shah, and the Grand Rabbi of France. He turned them all on to cocaine. In fact, Pope Leo XIII carried a flask of the wine on his hip at all time. And of course, in time, this formula got to Atlanta. They took out the Bordeaux wine, they took out the cocaine, kept in the flavonoids, and Coca-Cola is born. And that's why Coca-Cola is still the only legal importer of coca leaves in North America, 150 tons of which reaches New Jersey from Anaco every year. And that's why, of course, Coke is in fact the real thing. But by the late 19th century, cocaine was everywhere. But then gradually, of course, people realized that it wasn't the panacea they had promised. And the reversal of fortunes was immediate. And thus a mild stimulant that had been used without any toxicity, let alone addiction, for 8,000 years, suddenly became viewed as an addictive drug. But of course, coca is not cocaine, and to equate the leaf with the raw alkaloid is as misguided as suggesting that the delicious fruit of a peach is equivalent to the hydrogen cyanide found within the pit of the peach. And yet, for nearly a century, that has been the official view and policy of nations and international organizations throughout the world. The US government in particular has long demonized the plant. And here's where we have to begin a cambiar el narrativo. The effort to eliminate the traditional fields in Peru began 70 years before there was a drug problem in North America and Europe. The issue was never cocaine, but the cultural identity of those who revered the plant. When bourgeois physicians in Lima looked up into the Andes in the 1920s and saw social pathology, because if issues of economics and justice came too close, land reform came too close to challenging the foundations of their bourgeois lives in Lima, they had to settle on a culprit. And they picked Coca. And every conceivable problem was laid at the doorway of the sacred plant. And the language of these medical authorities is simply shocking today. This man, Carlos Gutierrez Noriega, was probably one of the most vocal ideological adherents to this idea. And he famously wrote in 1947 in a publication in the Peruvian Ministry of Education, the use of coca, illiteracy, and a negative attitude toward the superior culture are all closely related, and was largely because of his lobbying that the UN came to Peru in 1949. And incredibly, that delegation, led by Henry Howard Fonda, a drug executive from Williams Burroughs Wellcome, announced their conclusions upon arrival at the airport in Lima, and then told the assembled press they were going to go into the highlands to affirm their conclusions. And it was that twisted study, driven by hatred ideology, and individuals who concern for the so-called welfare of indigenous people in the Andes was matched only in its intensity by their ignorance of Andean life. That's what gave us the very conventions that the vice president was talking about, that Martin has been working on for so long. And incredibly, in the middle of all this hysteria, nobody did the obvious. A simple nutritional study to see what a plant that was consumed every day by 6 million Peruvians actually had in it. And finally, in 1973, Schultes got a grant from the USDA and set loose on the problem one of the most charismatic, extraordinary, beautiful men that I've ever known, Timothy Plowman. And I was fortunate at the age of 19, if you can imagine, to become his field assistant for 2 years. My mother would write me letters, "Are you still with Dr. Plowman?" As if that was a good thing. But with Andy Weil, Tim didn't just study the taxonomy, the phylogeny. We're going to hear so much from Dawson about that. Dawson has become the new Tim Plowman as I see it. But critically, with Jim Duke at the USDA, they finally did do a nutritional study of the plant. And what they found haunted our backers at the US government. Yes, Coca had a tiny amount of the alkaloid in a very different form, as we'll hear from Anthony. But in addition to the small amount of alkaloid used as a benign stimulant in a harsh environment, the plant was chock full of vitamins, nutrients, protein. It had more calcium than any plant ever studied by science, which made it perfect for an Andean diet that traditionally lacked a dairy product. It had enzymes in it which enhanced the body's ability to digest carbohydrate at high elevation, making it perfect for the potato-based diet of the Andes. In one simple, elegant scientific assay that could have been done in 1920, Tim put into stark profile the draconian efforts to eradicate the traditional fields and showed that this plant was a plant that had been used with no signs of toxicity, let alone addiction, for over 8,000 years in the Andes. Now, of course, none of this will come as a surprise to students of South American history. For the Inca, Coca figured prominently in every ritual and in all daily life, as it does to this day. You could not, in the Coricancha, approach the altar if you did not have Coca in your mouth. Today in Chinchero, the fields are blessed with Coca in the morning. The tools are blessed in the evening with leaves. Leaves are blown to Pachamama from the summits of the mountain. Diviners see the future in the venation of leaves, but for that gift you must have been able to survive a lightning strike and become a tiracuna. Without Coca, the Inca could not have marched armies across the empire. If you had Coca in your mouth when you died, your route to the afterlife was assured. But of course, just as the Inca revered the plant, so did all the peoples. And as we'll hear from Danny and Susie in their incredible archivo, everywhere Coca was revered. As long ago at Nanchok, 8,000 years ago, lime pots and ceramic figurines of Coca use is found in every pre-Columbian culture, from Paracas, Chimu, Moche, Huanaco, everywhere. And of course, the word Coca itself is an Aymara word, meaning the bush of all bush, the tree of all trees. Now, the plant itself is a delicate but beautiful shrub with small white flowers and fruits the color of rubies. The texture of the leaves varies because, of course, we have, lucky you, both cultivated varieties here. Thanks to Hyson, we have Erythroxylon novogranatense, variety novogranatense, the Coca of Colombia. This, of course, was the Coca of the 13th century Muisca and Quimbayo goldsmiths, the stimulant of the unknown people who built the monuments at San Agustin, the leaves that were seen by the first Spaniards when they arrived on the coast of what is now Colombia. Used today not just in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in Colombia, but also in the homeland of Fabiola in Coca for the Nasa people. And of course, here in Cusco, we have Huanaco Coca, the Coca of Peru, Erythroxylon Coca variety Coca. Now, each of these has each of these species, cultivated species, to varieties, of course. Ipadu, the coca of the Amazon, is in fact Peruvian coca brought down the river Ucayali during pre-Columbian times. And of course, Colombian coca came down the coast of Peru, and the coca of Trujillo, which is the coca of Coca-Cola, and the preferred coca of the Inca is Erythroxylon novogranatense variety Trujillense. But thanks to Dawson, this story takes on a whole nother level, which is almost miraculous. Timothy thought, based on morphology alone and the fact that the Colombian coca can self-pollinate. Now in botany, self-pollination is good for the plant, bad for the species. So it's always considered a derived trait. So based on pure morphology, Tim thought that Colombian coca was derived from Peruvian coca. But thanks to the work of Oscar and Dawson, we know something else, which is a miracle. Both cultivated species were independently derived, and I'm stealing this from you guys. I'm just stealing it from you. But when I first read this, it blew my mind. Independently derived from the same common ancestor, Erythroxylon gracilipes. So what does that mean? It means 2,000 miles apart, human beings found in the forest this wild species, not only domesticated it, but revered it. And so all the descendants of that moment, that far apart in geography, give us the sacred notion of coca throughout the Americas. I don't think, Dawson, there's another example in the history of the domestication of plants where such an event has occurred. Independent, but not this idea of reverence. So it adds a level to the narrative. Now, of course, this shouldn't surprise us. Now, when the Spanish arrived, as we well know, they saw all things indigenous as idolatry. And they didn't understand that when they destroyed a sacred place for the people of the Andes, they only affirmed its inherent sanctity, because it was never a building that was worshipped, it was the land upon which the building stood. But it became clearly apparent that without coca, the enslaved workers in Potosí and elsewhere, Huancavelica, would not work. And so famously, Toledo, 40 years, 50 years after the conquest, reversed the edict and not only made coca production acceptable, it became the economic foundation of the emerging colony. And ironically, the church that had demonized coca found its entire source of wealth throughout the 16th and 17th century in the commercialization of coca. But this is where it gets interesting. And when I talk about changing the narrative, we have to pay attention to what the chroniclers said. Everyone expressed wisdom and awe when encountering this plant. And it became that praise for coca became more pronounced in the 19th century. And if you read the accounts of travelers and physicians, there's a kind of an ingenuous kind of bewilderment. Like the plant is this miraculous plant, but a stimulant that's not a stimulant, you can only understand it by what it does for you. So for example, famously, this character, Sir Robert Christensen, when he was the head of the British Medical Association, decided to put the leaves to a test in Scotland. And he walked with students 30 miles across the moors, climbed, as he said, Ben Forth. And then on arrival home before dinner, I felt neither hunger nor thirst after complete abstinence from food and drink of every kind for 9 hours. And after dinner appeared, I had ample justice to eat it. He didn't understand that he walked without food all day because of Mama Coca. And at the time, he was 79 years old. And all these travelers are saying the same things. I won't belabor this, but the one I really love is Mortimer, our great hero. I know Susie loves Mortimer. 1877, the International Lacrosse Championship in Toronto. 2 Canadian teams, of course, because we invented the sport. We got it from the Indigenous people. One team is full of these fat clerks from the city. The other team is full of lumberjacks from the north and the bush. Everybody thought, of course, the lumberjacks would win. It was hot, humid, insufferable, people passing out all over the place. but the clerks won. And the clerks won because they were all mambiando coca. Now, this is really wonderful. I mean, this is what, while no other known substance can rival coca in its sustaining power, no other has so little apparent effect. The chewing of coca gives no special sensation. In fact, the only result seems to be a negative one, an absence of the customary desire for food and sleep. It is only when some unusual demand is made upon mind or body that its influence is felt. And Andy Weil captured this quality beautifully when he described his first experience with mambe in 1973. The effect of coca, he reported, was so subtle that it could not be compared to any other natural product. He took it first at night. It was pleasant. But it was only in the morning that he came to understand what all the fuss was about. I found myself marching along in a column of cubeos, swinging my machete, humming a tune, and feeling increasingly happy. The coca seemed stronger at this hour in the morning. Its warm glow spread from my stomach throughout my body. I felt a subtle vibrational energy in my muscles. My step became light, and there was nothing I wanted to do more than just what I was doing. Now, the difference between cocaine and coca, the Peruvian anthropologist Enrique Meyer once quipped, is a difference between traveling by mule and jet plane. Now, it's a clever line, but it fundamentally misses the point that the actions of coca and cocaine are not comparable. Each gives a sense of well-being, but one assaults the senses. And the preferred leaves for the indigenous people are always those with the lowest amount of alkaloid. What's more, the cultures of cocaine and coca could not be more different. What draws people to cocaine is the exotic decadence, slipping into the shadow of a party to show your exclusivity, snorting a few grains of a substance that these days could be anything, guaranteeing that you'll join the cohort of the epidemic of hepatitis C suffered by those who in their youth somehow found it cool to be rolling up a $100 banknote and snorting cocaine as you shared the snot of a stranger. Of course, coca, as you know, is less a high than a meditation. Consumed as mambe in the Amazon, by the Barasana, it always requires, as you know, an alkaline additive. In the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, our brother Hyson has a poporo filled with cal, lime derived from seashells, gathered at the end of long, elaborate pilgrimages. For the mamos of the Kogi and the Arahuaco, the chewing of hayo represents the most profound expression of culture. At night, before they rest, they taste the leaves, deep in contemplation of the day that has passed. And every morning, hayo greets the new dawn. Every man consumes roughly a pound of leaves a day, beginning at marriage and continuing until his final breath. Journeying across landscape, making sacrifices from the sea to the high peaks, still ruled 500 years after the conquest by a ritual priesthood of mamos, the training for which is austere in the extreme, making payments at the mouth of the Rio Magdalena. Mamo Camilo saying to me, peace won't matter if just an excuse for the three sides of the conflict in Colombia to continue a war against nature. We must have peace with the entire natural world. As you saw last night with Nilda and her friends from Chinchero in the Andes, coca is obviously equally important today. Distance measured not in miles or kilometers, but in cocadas, the length of time a traveler can walk with a quid of coca. When people meet on the trail, they pause and exchange quintus of leaves, 3 perfect leaves in a cruceta, which you take, exchange, and then blow to the spirits of the apu. The eyes lifted toward the apu, they bring the leaves to the mouth, And of course, this ritual invocation sends the essence of the plant back to the earth, the community, the sacred places, the souls of the ancestors. Now, this exchange of leaves is a social gesture, a way of acknowledging a human connection. But the blowing of the puke is an act of spiritual reciprocity. For in giving selflessly to the earth, the individual ensures that in time the energy of the coca will return full circle, as surely as rain falling on a field will inevitably be reborn as a cloud. Now, the etiquette of hallpay, which is the totality of the act of using coca, the exchange and salutations, the way one places the leaves in the mouth, the attitude of reverence and respect, in a very real sense, as we learned from Nilda, defines what it means to be runakuna, a child of Pachamama. Throughout the entire Andean world, as anthropologist Catherine Allen writes, one cannot function as a social being unless you partake of the ritual, and you must do it properly. Nothing offends local people more than tourists eating coca like horses eating hay. So whether the leaves are taken in the presence of a friend, a stranger, alone, or together with the community, to chew coca, to hallpay, is to transcend self and become part of the social, moral, and spiritual nexus that in the Andes gives meaning to life. Coca alone, as Nilda told us, makes possible direct communication with the divine. Thus, for the people of the Andes, to be without coca is a form of social and spiritual death, an excommunication from existence itself. Therefore, efforts to deny the runakuna access to coca is not like denying Germans access to beer, Indonesians access to betel nut, Turks access to coffee. These are policies of cultural genocide. Now, the war on drugs began in 1971 when Richard Nixon, who could not care less about drug use, used the issue to isolate those opposed to his ideology and create the illusion of a silent majority. And in doing so, he let loose what is probably the most grotesque public policy initiative in the history of government. At a time, most Americans had never heard of cocaine. Today, 50 years on, there is more cocaine produced and sold illicitly than ever before. Thanks to prohibition, the US is the only developed nation to have more citizens with criminal records than university degrees. And in Colombia, an actual war that would not have lasted a day without the sordid profits of prohibition has left 400,000 muertos, 7 millones desplazados, 5 millones que tuvieron que salir del país. Una guerra totalmente que fue culpa de los gringos y todos los que están utilizando y consumando esa plaga, esa droga. And so cocaine has become Colombia's curse, but consumption drives the trade. And ultimate responsibility for the agonies of Colombia come in good measure with everybody who has ever bought street cocaine and every foreign nation that has made possible the illicit market by prohibiting the drug without curbing its use in any serious way. Now, even were a complete removal of the plant to be desirable, it's highly unlikely that countries like Colombia or Peru could ever eliminate coca. The financial incentives for small families are too great, the areas of cultivation too remote. Crop substitution programs are a complete delusion. Nothing can compete economically with coca. Juan Manuel Santos, the 2016 Nobel laureate, served as defense minister under Álvaro Uribe and later president of Colombia. No one in the world, he once told me, had been responsible for eliminating more coca plants than him. Policies that he agreed proved in the end to be a total failure. He now advocates the only rational solution, the cleansing stroke of legalization, without which the corrosive influence of cocaine will never subside. So the war on drugs has not only been a grotesque failure, the most misguided campaign in public policy history, critically, it has blackened the name and robbed us of the promise of one of the most beneficial plants known to botanical science. And yet the war goes on year after year, month after month, decade after decade, with no one held accountable for its failures and no end in sight. And we remain stuck for a simple reason, something that I understood in a flash in the spring of 1975, when, having worked with Tim Plowman for 2 years, I returned to the United States. There was a job opening at the US Department of Agriculture that Tim told me to apply for. But he also told me if I accepted the job, he would kill me. So intrigued, I went out to the USDA, found this corpulent bureaucrat. He was DEA head to toe. I couldn't get into his office for the cigarette smoke. He was a drug addict. His walls were covered with seized drug paraphernalia. It was like going into the office of an anti-pornographer and having the walls blanketed with pornography. And it was the 1970s. Big collar, big gold chains, gold bands on here. And the job offer, all they had discerned from our 2 years of research was that Tim and I were good at finding coca fields. And he wanted me to go back to Peru, find all the insects and pests that predate on coca, bring them back to the United States to be genetically manipulated, and then reintroduced into Latin America. And as I'm looking at this asshole, I'm thinking, where do I know you? I was convinced I knew him. Where have we met before? And it suddenly dawned on me, I'd never met him, but I lived in Medellin in 1973 when the cartel was emerging. Carlos Lida was our neighbor. People would come by our farm with briefcases full of cocaine, free just to play their guitars. And I realized I'd never met him, but I met him a million times. He was the cartel. Their energy was exactly the same. They were two sides of the same coin. And of course, neither one had any interest in ending the war on drugs. The DEA would lose its $67 billion budget, and of course, the cartels would be out of work as well. And that's when I realized that this war on drugs was simply never going to end. Now, I didn't take that job, needless to say, but somebody did. And it wasn't too long later that various insect pests were introduced to the cocales. And it was only when Bill Clinton canceled the program as it being an act of biological warfare, which it was, that this stopped. And that caused the Americans to turn to herbicides. 4.4 million acres of Colombia poisoned with Roundup. And these campaigns only drove the cartels deeper into the forest. In 2015, Santos finally stopped this, but then the peace agreement comes along, $45 billion price tag, 578 conditions. Just when 3 million Venezuelans are coming across the border, does Colombia shut the door? No. It opens it wide, feeds the kids, houses them, gives them the right to work, gives them instant universal health care, and yet at a time when Colombia needs every single penny to pay the cost of peace, having drained its treasury for 50 years to pay for the cost of a sordid war that would never have happened without prohibition. And at that moment, America threatens Duque and is going to withhold $500 million of promised aid to support the peace process unless they begin to spray again. And so Duque really has no option. At the end of the day, then, it's simply time to find another way. Rather than yielding to American pressure, now is the time for Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia is already doing it, to reclaim a stolen legacy by celebrating coca for what it really is, what the Incas saw it to be. Market as a tea, perhaps as a chewing gum, for those not keen or to use dried leaves or powder. The sacred plant could be Colombia's and Peru and Bolivia's greatest gift to the world, dwarfing the commercial success of coffee simply because it is so much better as a stimulant. And we have to shift this narrative from saying coca is not cocaine to saying what coca really is. Who would not want to experience a sense of enhanced energy and mental clarity? a mild suppression of hunger, a gentle feeling of creative confidence, a lightness to one's step lasting throughout the day, knowing that the source of your slight elevation of mood was a benign and highly nutritious plant that had been revered by the peoples of the Americas for 8,000 years. In a digital economy in which work for so many implies sitting and looking at a laptop screen for hours on end, what could be more welcome or promising than a natural product that facilitates focus and concentration, even while inducing a subtle sense of contentment and well-being? Those who experience Coca invariably come away astonished by its subtle yet pleasant effects, its practical uses. Hallucinogens may be helpful for a handful of individuals. Every human being in the industrial world suffers from existential malaise. We're giving Ritalin to our children. We're poisoning their bodies when all of this could be ameliorated with the mother plant itself. So this really is our movement, to stimulate research with people like Chris, to document with Andy the medical and therapeutic benefits. As Juan Carlos said, there's so few studies that have been done. A plant that promises to improve everybody's well-being and ease the day-to-day challenges of their lives. A wide array of coca-based products that will bring delight to consumers, even while supporting the 230,000 Colombian families who grow the plant for a living, allowing them to sever, to some extent at least, their ties to the cartels. The liberation of the leaves will undermine the black market trade, reduce deforestation, as we'll learn from Camille, by opening up for cultivation lands long ago cleared and abandoned. Through taxation, it will generate for Colombia the revenues that will allow a long-suffering nation to pay the price of peace, having drained, as I said, its treasury for 50 years to cover the costs of a war only made possible by the sordid profits of prohibition. Coca is not cocaine, and it's surely time to see this sacred plant return to its rightful status, heralded now as in the time of the Inca and all the ancient civilizations of the Andes as a gift of the gods. Coca, the divine leaf of immortality. Thanks very much.